Tēnā tātou planting seeds no mai hoki mai. Thank you for being here. And we're here at the World Indigenous Cancer Conference, and I've been contracted in by Aotearoa to bring some of the stories and mātauranga and approaches to well-being, to share those and make those accessible for each and every one of you who are tuning into this, because as I walk into this kaupapa, there are a lot of people that are here from different parts of the world, as well as just different arms in the same space of health and well-being. And very fortunate to have someone by the name of Dr. Nina Scott join us for this kōrero. So no mai, Dr. Nina, how are you doing?
Good. It's the last day and I feel as though we need one more day just to finish all of the reconnecting that we've the journeys that we're on.
Yeah, because that's the good thing about it, coming into a place not only just to listen to all of the wealth of mātauranga, but it's the building on those connections and those relationships. So can you talk about that element of coming into a space like this from your perspective?
Yeah, so we've been doing, I think this is our 4th World Indigenous Cancer Conference. I've been lucky enough to be to all of them.
Wow.
And we're building up some really good relationships and partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we only get together every couple of years, kanohi, but I think we've had multiple, like webinars where we kind of invite each other across the waves to connect into different kaupapa. So that's been really, really beneficial. We've written a book, published a book, edited a book. Gail led the editing of the book, International Indigenous and Tribal People's Cancer, and done a whole lot of shared projects together. We've always been trying to have some global impact, because it's quite hard as Indigenous peoples within a country to make shifts that need to happen, because, the colonial structures, the first thing they do is they dampen down the voices and eliminate the voices of their Indigenous people, right? And so, therefore, it's very hard to get our voices heard at the country level. So when it comes to the international cancer control agencies, it's like Indigenous people just don't exist. There's no seat at the table for Indigenous people. So we've been trying to remedy that. And, we had a lot of conversation at the first World Indigenous Cancer Conference in Australia. And then the second one in Calgary, we drafted up. We actually drafted up multiple calls to action on lots of different things, but we got one published in the Lancet. That was a letter. And the World Health Organization did respond to it within that same Lancet publication. And then we kept working on our more comprehensive call to action, but we kind of went a little bit too deep and complex. And now we're taking a step back, and we're just asking for 2 things. One is a seat at the table, and one is some resourcing to enable engagement, because most Indigenous cancer leaders don't have the resources to be able to, go anywhere to these meetings. And a lot of the international cancer control agencies require you to actually physically be at the table once you've got a seat. So, yeah, that's our latest thing, and we're hoping to get all the signatures today and some feedback, and then
to strengthen that call to action, and to have more seats at the table at that global level.
Yep, it's pretty basic, but we need to start with basic. We need to start with seats at the table, and those international organisations, the World Health Organization and others, they recognise that they are failing in meeting the needs of Indigenous peoples, but they're not quite sure what to do. So we're saying, hey, we can help you with that. We actually have some solutions. And they know that, so it's just a matter of figuring out how we go about this. And we have engaged with all 4 of them to in the drafting of the call to action. It's only like 2 or 3 pages, so yeah.
Wow, can tell a lot of work has probably gone into those discussions, into creating an approach and a plan to kind of see where the gap is, and okay, we can see a way there, but how do we kind of get there and how do we fill it? And it's cool to kind of see how, well, I wouldn't say, I don't think cool is the right word, but just to see that even on a country level, there isn't really a seat at the table, but then on a global level, there isn't. But when you're seeing something of this magnitude, there are strong voices and there is some major impact that is being had. And so that's something that will be cool to actually talk to you about, because you've been to all 4 of the WICs, the World Indigenous Cancer Conferences. But what have you kind of seen being here in Aotearoa and kind of the differences in how they've been hosted in these different parts of the world or countries, and then what's it been like here in Aotearoa?
Well, they've all been different, you know, and, you know, it's like the old duck with the legs going under the water and cool, calm, collected up the top. You know, they all look pretty cool, calm and collected, but we know that it's hard work behind the scenes, and there's some big mahi going on. And, I've seen a bit of that in all of them, but in both sides, they're all, it's all just a beautiful opportunity to connect, and some really, they all feel really good spaces to be in. But I think that's the people that make the spaces beautiful.
And that's why it's all hectic on the bottom and calm on top, because all of their hecticness makes it calm for the people who come in, and I guess for the homes who are doing the manaakitanga, that's what they want. They want everyone who's coming here to feel calm while everyone else is in the background doing all of the hard mahi to make it all happen and make it all possible. And I've had Jackie on the podcast, I've had Jason on the podcast, and I've had Raglan on the podcast. And what I was able to draw from each of them was why it is that they do what they do, because they had in some way been affected by, whether it was a family member or someone close that has gone through some kind of hardship and challenge, whether it was health related with mum or dad, or just wanting to see something different within their culture and within their people. And so why did you get into this kind of space, Nina? Or how, probably?
I mean, you know, my fun have had their fair share of stuff going on, but that's not what drove me, really. It's seeing more at a kind of systems level, the fundamental differences, like growing up in Northland and seeing the 2 different worlds, you know, the Māori world and Pākehā world, and there wasn't a lot of connection between them, and very little understanding, and from the Pākehā side of the Māori world, and then when I became a doctor, just getting a deeper understanding of the health inequities and the way the health system is set up in such a way that it just kind of perpetuates those inequities and drives them and actually creates them. You know, the bowel screening program is just a really good example of massive inequities being created through the decision of a minister.
Can you talk about that? What's the bowel screening process that you're kind of alluding to in terms of inequity and the...
So, you know, when the bowel screening program was started, the pilot was from age 50 to, I think it was 75 or 70, I can't remember. But because we didn't have enough people to do the colonoscopies required, because, you know, you do the test, and then if there's enough blood in the poos, then you get a colonoscopy. And that's when they look inside the bowel and see if there's any like cancers or precancers, which are the little polyps. They're going to snip the polyps out, and it prevents you from having the cancer, or find the cancers when they're really early and curative, hopefully. So there weren't enough people to be able to do those colonoscopies in the country. to roll out bowel screening from age 50. So after doing the pilot, which showed us that we could do it, they said, okay, well, we'll just make it start at age 60. And then slowly, as the colonoscopy capacity increases, we'll roll the age back. And we did some analysis, well, actually it was Mel McLeod, which showed that most Māori who are diagnosed with bowel cancer are diagnosed before the age of 60.
Oh.
Most non-Māori who are diagnosed with bowel cancer are diagnosed after the age of 60, because most of the population is non-Māori. At a total population level, it makes sense to start the bowel screening program at age 60. But if you actually give a shit about equity, you need to start it from age 50 for Māori and Pacific in order to get at least equitable outcomes. So, and there was overwhelming support from everybody we talked to, from academics, politicians, health policy people, that, this is so common sense, because the numbers of Māori and Pacific are so small, we could have the colonoscopy capacity to do that. And it wouldn't have cost a lot of money, and it would have mean equitable outcomes. So the health gain from screening would have been equal between Māori Pacific and non-Māori non-Pacific. There wouldn't. It's not anybody getting more. It's not anybody getting less. This is fairness and equity. And it took us 6 years of writing and pushing until the government finally said, yes, we'll do it. And the reasons why they didn't say yes for those 6 years, they came up with all sorts of bullshit excuses, and they were just rubbish. One of the first excuse was risk of white backlash. There was talk of, we can't do this because we'll be accused of being racist, or we can't do this because we don't have the numbers. We actually do have the numbers, and it's not racist. But then the government finally said, I think it was 2024, they said, yes, we'll do it. And then last year, the minister repealed that and said, no, we're not going to do it anymore. We've changed our minds. We don't
go back up to 60.
They didn't give any good reason, but they've changed their minds. And instead, what they decided to do with the money was to change the age to 58 for everybody, which doesn't do anything for equity. Yeah, so that's.
So they went from above 60 to 58.
They went from 60 to 58 for everybody. Yeah. So.
Wow.
So that's just complete and utter racism, and it just managed to get slipped through, and we can count the number of lives that are being lost because of this. And now there's talk of, there's lobby groups wanting to lower the age of bowel screening to 45 for everybody, and 35 for Māori and Pacific, which is great. But we do not have the colonoscopy capacity to do that currently in the country. There is a program, it's called Fit for Symptomatic, which is a pretty cool program, and it's meant to free up colonoscopy capacity.
And you said that was the testing, their colonoscopy capacity.
Colonoscopy is when you have somebody looking into the bowel with a little camera.
Oh, okay, yes.
But I think this new program, which is meant to free up the colonoscopy capacity, is not all that it's promised to be, and it won't actually free up as much as fast as we need it, as everybody is hoping. So I think, as usual, the equity equation, Māori and Pacific people are going to be bearing the brunt of this really poor leadership. And
it's Māori that are and Pasifika that are the ones that are actually losing out big time.
Like these are lives lost. And I think the government did it for votes. I think they did this to appease the racist vote, the right-wingers, who thought, oh, this is earlier for Māori and Pacific. We don't like that. Oh, and then the government's getting rid of it. Oh, I'll vote for them because they're racist.
And for you being so close to that in terms of seeing the research and having a deeper understanding of the ramifications of these kinds of policies or lack of support, like what's the emotion that you feel? Is it like just anger, frustrated, sadness? Like what kind of...
I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, right? And I'm 56 and I don't know, when I graduated as a doctor in my 20s, it was quite funny because I looked young in my 20s, and when I walked around the hospital with my stethoscope, people used to go, nurse, nurse. And I'm like, yes. But, now I'm older. But so back then when I was younger, I did have all of those big emotions and I let them fly and told people what I thought and got angry and might have done a bit of yelling. But now I don't want to I want to fill my body with good emotions and happiness, and so I try and focus on positive stuff. And I don't know.
That's something that I've been hearing quite a lot about as well from all of everyone who is sitting there. Well, probably because you're looking at it all the time, and it can be quite morbid or can be quite depressing and hard. But if that's something that consumes you, then I can see why is to you don't want to entertain that too long or for too much.
No, that's why I was happy to come and talk to you, because I thought we were talking about gardening. I love planting seeds. I'm like, oh, you want to talk about this stuff? Okay.
Well, we can talk about that, because the other thing that was on my mind is, I actually walked into the bowel
that's cool,
tubey. I think I forgot what they called, but when you're talking about the things that come out, I was like, I actually got a visual of what they look like now. So that was actually quite a new thing for me to actually see it all. But those are some of the bigger challenges. Is like there is health things and decisions that are being made, whether it's in their systemic approach because it's all set up in ways that kind of make it addictive to reach for bad habits or whatever it may be. But to come back to gardening and planting seeds, how is that related to well-being, and is it a part of well-being in terms of health, good health?
So we had a session with Nicole Redfus and Rhys Jones and others, and Miley from Hawaii, talking about the links between planetary health, Mother Earth, and cancer. And sometimes things are so obvious that people find it hard to see them because it's like
right there.
It's there is the fundamental driver of cancer is planetary health. And at the systems level, like big tobacco. People, if you go to a country and look at the smoking rates, maybe 50 years ago, it wasn't because everybody suddenly woke up and decided, I'm going to be a smoker and, massively increasing my risk of dying. It's because the tobacco industries were allowed to come here. Actually, they were encouraged to come here because the governments and people got money out of them. And they pushed tobacco. And we've got the same thing happening with the global food industry. They're pushing their shit on us, and that's killing us. And we've lost our connection with the land and our connection with our own food systems. And our sovereignty over even our own bodies and our families, what is in our house in terms of food and tobacco and alcohol. You watch any movie, how much alcohol's in there, and how much of the alcohol industries paid for their product placement and framing tobacco, alcohol as a good thing, and even at the community level, communities can't get rid of the McDonald's in their street. They can't get rid of those bottle-o stores. We can't stop supermarkets from selling alcohol along with food, as though that's a good thing. And we all used to rely on the earth for our sustenance. Now we don't even know. Kids don't even know that their sustenance comes from the earth.
That's where it comes from, Packers Eve.
Yeah. And those Indigenous knowledge systems have been those big industries. They don't want us to reconnect with our Indigenous knowledge systems because they're not going to make money from it. And that's what it comes down to. So I think, finding ways of reconnecting with the earth and improving our sovereignty. I don't know if that's a term, but and saying no to those, keeping them out. Got to keep them out of our communities, our houses. Maile from. It'd be great if you could interview her. So she showed some pictures of, in Hawaii, they call taro kalo. And we have taro here. So we brought taro over on our waka and planted it in the ngahere, and it's been forgotten. And if you go into the ngahere in Northland, you'll find taro patches everywhere, and they're different types. So my dad, when he was a hunter, he used to get different types whenever he saw one. We had a taro library of lots of different types of taro. But we've forgotten that as our traditional kai. And in Hawaii, they have these beautiful taonga. They're big kind of pounding instruments that they carve out of rock. And they get their kalo and they pound it into a paste. And then they ferment it, and it's really good for you. And they feed it to that's their baby's first kai, traditionally. And I'm like, hey, maybe we could ask Maile to come over and do some workshops with us on how to make that. Because we can grow it because of climate change. We can probably grow it all throughout the North Island and some little places in Te Waipunama as well. So,
and just to be able to reconnect to those Indigenous systems. Yeah,
let's have an international Indigenous kind of kai sovereignty network where we kind of and I was just talking to Linda, who's Burhan Stipanoff. It'd be great you could talk to her. She's Indigenous, Native Hawaiian, and Native American, and we were talking to her about the Hawaiian taro, and she was saying that theirs is corn.
Wow.
They used to pound their corn, but that's really exciting to actually reactivate some of that.
It's quite interesting how everything is actually all connected that way. As you say, the planetary or whenua well-being is connected to, human well-being and oranga whānau, and it's all so interconnected. It's not separated into one individual thing. It's everything is deeply connected. So if we're well within our whānau, that's when we can either look out to creating or contributing to other people, or even just to the whenua, or whatever it looks like. But I think there is that sense of symbiotic kind of relationship between all things. And the other thing that kind of comes to mind, Nina, is a seed was planted, and that was with some of the kaimahi, and they said some of the amazing work that you've done to support whānau who are getting a lot of medical terminology kind of thrown at them as they're lying in the hospital bed and getting overwhelmed with man, I don't even know what the hell you're saying. This feels like jargon, but you've been very instrumental in supporting whānau and having what they call a navigator that can really simplify some of the kōrero that has been shared. So can you please talk about that kaupapa and how can people be more, how can people access, I guess, navigators?
Oh, how many hours have we got? I remember first learning, cancer care navigators, I think back in our first World Indigenous Cancer Conference, it was just kind of starting up, right? And there was some kōrero back then that, is this a good thing or not? Because, you've got a navigator who's usually a community person, non-medically trained, kind of like in a powerless position within this very hierarchical medical system, working alongside a whānau member has similar levels of power within that system. So two powerless people, what's the point of that? And so I always kept that in mind when we started, and it just became very obvious that we do need navigators. It happened by accident for me because I was working in paediatric ward at Waikato Hospital. I worked there as a doctor for quite a few years, and I was always frustrated because, these kids would come in and you'd treat them for their diseases of poverty. You'd send them home and they'd be back. Or their whānau would be back, their siblings would be back. And it's like, I'm not making any difference to these kids' lives, And so we developed up a health needs assessment to address some of those fundamental drivers of their wellbeing, like healthy housing. We managed to get, heaters and curtains and beds and pajamas and kai and immunisations and car seats and WINS benefits and all of that kind of stuff. And that was fantastic. It was just a piece of paper that went into every kid's notes, every whānau who came through the hospital in paediatrics from 2012 to I think 2016. So there were thousands of tamariki and whānau who benefited from that program. But then the program was called Hearty, was starting to be shared in other DHBs, but without the quality assurance and without the training and without anybody reviewing the screening questions or the follow-up protocols. So one of the follow-up protocols was if the whānau didn't have a car seat, refer them to Plunkett and here's the number and da-da-da-da. But we checked and Plunkett was no longer providing the car seat rental. So we're like, got to change that. And we needed to check all of them. So we got some money and did a randomised trial with 1,000 whānau, and we spent the first 6 months redoing the entire health needs assessment, making it electronic.
Cool.
We figured out, okay, there was no car seat providers in the Waikato. We had to become a car seat. I was car seat provider. My office was full of car seats for quite some time. But so it's unethical to ask about an unmet need if you can't then meet that need. So we had to take the time to do all of that and consult with experts around all of the kaupapa that were in the health needs assessment. And then COVID hit, and we thought, okay, we'll just redevelop this health needs assessment for the whānau of tamariki for kaumātua. Seems all the same stuff, A lot of kaumātua needed kai. We very quickly discovered that the missing link was clinical escalation pathway. So while we're in the hospital, the clinical services were right, okay, you guys can do your Māori navigation thing, and but just stay out of the clinical space because we've got this. And we're like, oh, yeah, that's fine. They did not have that. There were multiple things that, from the clinical perspective, needed sorting. And we did manage to sort some of these things out. For example, tamariki who came in on Friday with really bad eczema, infected eczema, were not able to receive the essential creams until Monday because of their clinical pathways.
Right.
And we locked the dermatologists and the paediatricians in a room with lots of home baking. 2 hours later, they had sorted it out. So we managed to sort things out at the systems level. But yeah, so we, back to COVID and kaumātua, we quickly developed a clinical escalation pathway. So it's a senior Māori nurse who has access to hospital records and also could ring the GP nurse to get the GP record. So she was able to, and she had access to a GP, and they had daily clinical huddles and on-call consultation as required, and the backup of a clinical doctor as required, and a hospital doctor as required. So we built this thing. We didn't think about it at the time, but it was very unique in that it crossed community to hospital level care. And that was like pure magic. So that team could do things that nobody else could do in the system. So community doctors find it really hard to get their patients into hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And hospital doctors really have no connection with community doctors. And whānau need systems to be integrated. And connected in order to solve their complex issues. And we call this whiri, and that's what whiri does. It works with whānau with the highest unmet needs. So we talk about the peak of the maunga whānau. So those with the most to gain. And it's been working magic ever since. And especially with, so we've been working in cancer, tuberculosis, maternity, long-term conditions, and community spaces. Yeah.
And do people who have these conditions have to request a whiri, or is it just...
It's only available where it's available.
Right.
Yeah, and so it's in very limited spaces, but we are in the process of doing some form of national rollout for whānau with cancer who are receiving certain medications, or who are receiving like chemotherapy. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's just, I've been saying it's in the startup phase for a very long time.
But it's still in the startup phase, eh?
Well, we've got a national clinical lead. You could talk to her. She's in here. I don't know if we could announce that yet. She's so cool. Everybody will love her. And yeah, so we've got a national clinical team, and the national clinical lead, who I won't say who it is, but who has implemented many whiri programs. And then we have regional managers, so 4 regional managers around the country.
Wow.
And 4 regional clinical leads. And there is a network of 27 community Māori cancer care coordinators who will be connected into this network. So we'll be able to turn the switch on.
Yeah.
For whānau.
Man, look at that impact, when you say that, doing it for whānau.
Yeah.
It's just whānau are getting support to support them in their journey with where they are. And I remember having a kōrero with Ricky Niania, and he was saying just how that's the role of these spaces is to look after whānau. But again, it comes down to whether it's inequity or whether it's just workload or whatever it is, but their support sometimes isn't being given. And so just having like as you're saying, this initiative, this kaupapa, this vision, is a way to be able to provide whānau with that support. So it's amazing to kind of, even though it's at the startup phase, look at how much mahi has been done and how much whānau it's actually supported. And so, Nina, this has come to that time. I know you've got
another million things.
They've got so much more to do, but would love to pass it over to you, to express whatever may be on your heart, whatever may be on your mind, whether it's a message, whether it's an action. Would love to just pass it over to you to finish off our kōrero.
I don't want to leave you with one big thing, but just leading on from what you're saying about looking after whānau, that's crucial. Our health system looks after parts of individuals. Doesn't even look at the health system currently doesn't look at individuals as whole people. It looks at individuals as what's wrong with them. You're the broken arm, or you're the cancer in your lungs or whatever. But I think it's important to look after people as whole people, all the dimensions that we know, te whare tapawha and the other tapas.
The tapas. Corn tapas.
But and individuals live within whānau, and the health systems, apart from Māori health providers, look after whānau, but the health system actually needs to look after whānau, because that's where you get the maximising the hauora gain, is when you start moving into that whānau realm, and then scope out to community, and then ora taio, so it's all connected in.
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't it be beautiful if every hospital service had that kind of level of thinking, and that would be manifested by looking after the land that the hospital's sitting on, all the land and all the hospitals in all the world probably are sitting on confiscated, stolen land.
Mm-hmm.
So some recognition of that and some kind of looking after the whenua and growing some marakai to, share with the whānau. Yeah.
Beautiful, Dr. Nina. Thank you so much for your kōrero. Thank you so much for the amazing mahi that your journey has led you towards, but also just a deeper calling and a higher purpose in, the masses that your body of work has contributed to. So just want to mihi to you, and also just want to mihi to everyone who is tuned into this podcast. I'll leave some links to Dr. Nina's mahi, and also to find out more about our World Indigenous Cancer Conference. So kia koutou mā, tēnā koutou, and te Nina, thank you very much.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Hey.